War. War never changes.
Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am once again building something from the world of Fallout. I recently released a vault door build which got a lot of views compared to normal, so I thought obviously the hype is there, people are excited about the new TV series coming out, and I wanted to knock something off of my to-do list from that world. There's been something on there for quite a while that I've always put off because it is a massive undertaking, and I would love to build a full set of cosplay, so I know what some of you are going to say once you see that thumbnail. I don't have the room in my house to house it. If I was to build a set of power armor, full scale, I would stand over 7 foot tall when I built it. Definitely something that will be done at some point, but not anytime soon. So I am going to start with just the helmet. The helmets, and with all the power armor, there's a lot of different variations of it, different attachments, different shapes. So there's a lot of choices when it comes to building the power armor from Fallout. I was looking through just kind of trying to pick my favorites, and I kind of honed in on the T45D, which to me kind of is that iconic one. It does span across a couple of the games, so it could connect to anybody who's wanting to build a specific cosplay from a specific game. This could tie into yours in some way, so without further ado, we are building a T45D power armor helmet from Fallout. Let's get to building. This was not a helmet for the faint of heart, to say the least. It was a lot of patterning as I went. The base had to be made before I figured out portions of all of the attachments as well as the underside. So what you see on the screen is about 2 hours worth of work. Altogether, I probably spent 8 to 10 hours just on the template for this one. My patterns are always free and listed down in the description below the video, the last link. This power armor helmet has been on my list for probably about a decade, so here goes nothing. Cut out the template and trace it onto your materials. I'm using mostly 6mm and 10mm EVA foam. This is HD foam, SKS, rep. But each part specifically is labeled with the size I used in the video. My patterns have lots of markings on them that may be new to some of you. I try to keep it fairly consistent across my builds and make them as simple as I can. Blue highlighted edges are inward 45-degree angle cuts. The green highlighted edges are outward 45-degree angle cuts, and the U shape you see on most of the edges are registration marks that will help you line up the parts with their corresponding pieces. This will be the longest video that I have ever made as of to date, simply because of all the different parts in this build. I tried to record most of it so that if anybody wants to build this, they have good references to go off of. I will also try and put extra explanations onto my template, as this is kind of a confusing build and it needs a little bit of extra comprehension. Because the helmet has a drastic curve on the top and around the mouth area, I'm going to use a heat gun and a round object to form the foam closer to its final form. I'm using a glass cover that typically goes on a porch light to mold mine. As the foam becomes pliable, push it onto the round object and hold it into place as the foam cools. This will relieve the stress on the seams during glue up. And for those of you thinking, I wonder if I can use a hairdryer, the answer is no. Hairdryers don't get hot enough to warm the EVA foam. If you're going to do foam fabrications, you can get a heat gun for as cheap as 10 or 15 bucks. Base assembly time, or at least the parts that I've figured out so far, I like to close up the darts first. Darts are those big V-shaped cuts within the pattern. These allow the pattern to round over in that area. Use the registration marks to help you line up the parts. If you don't get them perfect, it's okay. You'll see that not all of mine line up perfectly here. Foam is pretty forgiving and can be pulled or pushed to adjust. Sometimes it needs a little bit of heat, or you can shape and refine stuff with sanding later. With parts this big, I like to glue up 1/2 at a time with my contact cement so the glue doesn't sit for too long. Here I am joining the two halves together. The helmet design has a big undercut that wraps around the jaw to the back of the head. I couldn't figure this bit out until I had the base parts assembled here. So it may seem a bit flimsy at this point, but just know that once the wraparound is added to the back, it sturdies up quite a bit. With over 520 videos on YouTube, I sometimes breeze over stuff and edit bits out of the video so that it doesn't get too long. So for this build, I thought I would include more of the process since it was already going to be pretty long. I have chatted with a few people about leaving more in, and it seemed like something that maybe some of you would enjoy. Hopefully it helps, and if it does with this extended video format, let me know and I'll try and incorporate more of them into the rotation. Here I am trying to figure out the size and position of the recess in the middle. I drew a basic idea on where I thought it would be on my pattern. Then I used a ruler to help put it on my already assembled bit. You could just cut that blue line and trace it onto your pattern, but I'm making this as I go, so I wasn't sure. The ruler was just to help me guarantee that it was where I wanted it to be. Here is another bit that usually gets cut out of videos. I have my base build for the most part, and I know that I need to figure out the shape of my overlay around my eyes. I put down some foil and then put duct tape over the top of it to snugly fit around the helmet. Then I can look at my reference image to draw how I think it should fit. It's not a precise method for 100% accuracy, but it'll get you close if you have a good idea of the basic shape. I got my image off of a free 3D modeling program online called Sketchfab. Knowing where to put darts, registration marks, thickness of material, and other various markings just gets easier as you do it. I have a video dedicated to pattern making that I'll leave down in the description below. For me, Evil Ted, Punish Props, Cosplay Apprentice, SKS, Odin Makes were all some of the makers, along with dozens of others here on YouTube that I watched and learned how to do it myself. The part marked concaved was a bit tricky to figure out, but it was done similar to the way the previous clip was. I bunched up a whole ton of foil and shaped it into the curve that I wanted to go under the helmet. Then I laid down a final layer of foil to put duct tape over. I heat formed the curve into it and then glued it onto the inside edge of the helmet, not the bottom edge. I apologize for the over 24 circles in this template, but each was a little bit different in size, or I didn't want to crowd a small part with too many confusing labels. The ear is made up of 4 circles, and there's 2 ears, obviously. The bottom 2 have bevels, and the top 2 are straight edge. I did not template out the ridge for these that you see at the end result, as it's just a strip of about 1/4 of an inch wide 2mm foam. And depending on the reference image that you find, mainly across the different versions of the game, it may or may not show a ridge on that circle. You could cut in the bevel by using an inward 45 when cutting, but then you're blindly cutting to the next circle. I slapped on a respirator and sanded it to the edge on the bottom and through the circle line that I made. Then I just glued them together in a stack like a sandwich. On the back of the helmet, there is this raised panel that goes down the back canister. It flares out at the bottom to match up with the cylinder, so I glue these triangles to the bottom, then lay down this strip. I left the bottom open as it's going to get covered by the hanging canister anyways. The canister has ridges in it, and instead of just cutting strips to make them, I use 10mm foam and burn them in with a wood burner. Make sure to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area while burning foam. You don't want to breathe the nasty fumes in. My battery died on this clip, but I noticed it quickly, so you'll see a slight jump into the next clip. I heat up the foam to roll it up and then add glue to the inside edge and the ends of the foam for glue up. It's nice having a new can of contact cement without all the dry gloops on the top. I'm sure it won't last for long. Once the canister is assembled, I glue it to the underside of that middle divide. On the front filter, I burned in 8 slats with my wood burner, glued up the sides, and mounted it to the front of the mask. I also went ahead and marked up the position of the next couple of pieces. These are more things that I am figuring out as I go, and you could simply just cut those parts out of the pattern and trace it onto your materials before you glue up. The key thing to note on this part is that the bottom is bigger than the top on one side. I didn't pattern the extra ridge that goes along the edge, but it's just a piece of 4mm glued into where they join each other. Circles, circles, and more circles. I had to mark abbreviations on these parts so I wouldn't get them all mixed up. The larger stack on the bottom is where the hose attached later. Not sure what the other 2 nostril ones are for, but to add the button look to them that you can see on the reference images, I just pulled the drum out of my rotary tool and plunged it in carefully into the circles once they were secured onto the helmet. You could score them in with a hobby knife and heat them up, or use a wood burner into it if you wanted to. Any mess up or sanding slips that happen could easily be explained as battle damage later. The front has this ridge that goes down the middle, which is nice in that it covers up the seams for me, but the level of the helmet on the front side doesn't allow for this to easily be laid down. So I made these little wedge parts to go in between the brow and the nose, and then at the top ridge past that hinge. Then I could lay down a strip of 10mm foam for the filter all the way to the recess at the top of the head. Hey, guess what? No, not chicken butt. More circles. This particular model, as well as some of the others, have a reticle arm that swings over the eye. Mine will be glued stationary, but I'm assuming it is like a scope function. I've never seen it down while playing the game, but I guess you could make it to where it pivots if you wanted to. I used a denser piece of 6mm foam for the arm and glued a few bits to it. The laser bit has a metal swivel I pieced together with a piece of fencing wire and then shoved it into it. The assembly then got glued into the ear assembly, slotting in between the smaller circle that's in the middle. I used a 36mm EVA dowel as the base for my scope assembly, and instead of trying to burn in an even ridge with my wood burner, I just layered on a few strips of 2mm foam, and the larger bit was 4mm foam. I made them a bit long and then cut them to size during the glue up. I did template the weird little fin that goes on the top side and the scope opening at the end. I had a glass half dome that I sandwiched into it before I finished it off. Initially I was not going to add lights, but later decided that I wanted to add them, and I would highly recommend you making that decision before you build. Drilling in holes after glue up and having to pull parts apart that you already painted was not an easy task to not then mess up the whole helmet. So yes, I could have used resin cast rivets or burrowed them in with a bit, but I needed some of them to sit proud on the surface and I didn't want to use a different material. You could also use googly eyes or faux jewel caps or a number of other things that are small domed shape, but I wanted to use up some of my dowels and it just has a better connection foam to foam. I round over the ends and cut them off of the dowel once shaped. By making several small dowels, I can sand multiple ones at a time and then switch over to the cutting and kind of assembly line the whole thing. Then I just super glue them into place using my hobby knife point to hold it so that I don't super glue my ginormous fingers to the foam when I push them in. On this model of the T45D, there is a wire that runs from the underside of the right eye to the back canister area, and a hose under the left eye that attaches by an elbow joint to also run to the back. I just use various thicknesses of EVA dowels for this. For the support ridge, I used an 18mm and a 10mm dowel for the wire. The elbow I made out of a 24mm dowel and cut a wedge on the backside to make it look like it bends, then shoved the rest of the 18mm dowel for the tube. I don't exactly understand the purpose of them, but you can never have too many random bits on sci-fi helmets. For recessed rivets, I'm going to burrow them into the foam similar to how I did the buttons on the nostrils. The trick is to find the right size bit that you need to do this. I discovered that removing the bit housing and its cover has the perfect diameter circle to do this size rivet. Once I drilled it in with the rotary tool, I then poked it in the center with a wood burner. Two coats of Plasti-Dip. Then a light misting of silver, brown, and black spray paint. You may have been screaming at the screen if you're a Fallout fan that I forgot the headlamp. You would be right. I didn't realize it until I came back in from spray painting and saw the cutout parts laying off to the left just outside of the camera frame. No worries. I assemble the three parts, paint it separately, and then just sand back a little portion of it to glue on the helmet once dried. I think technically it can pivot on a bracket, but I'm going to glue mine directly on. If you look at the reference image, it is what those slotted areas are for, is for that bracket. Okay, so I didn't film the wiring on purpose. I'm not extremely comfortable with electronics, and I don't want to show you an improper technique or do something you shouldn't do. So use some better experienced references. Kami Cosplay has great ones. Bill from Punish Props, they all have excellent tutorials on how to do electronic wiring. I have some pre-soldered LEDs with different colors that I connect together to a battery pack that I modified even though the sticker told me not to, and it has like a pre-built-in switch. I also later made a pouch on the inside of the helmet to hold the battery pack in. Once I had it all wired up and tested, I covered the wires on the inside with a thin layer of 2mm foam. I diffused the green light with a clear piece of foam and a piece of green film from a binder divider. I added foil duct tape to the inside of the headlamp to hopefully reflect a little bit of the light, and I used the cover of a puck light that had a cool texture to cap off my headlamp. The lens I am using for the visor was from some random purchase I got on a flash sale out on Amazon. I think it technically was like a replacement visor for a motorcycle helmet. I hold it up to the hole on the inside and trace outside the opening with a Sharpie and give it just a little bit of extra room so that hot glue has an area to pull up in. Make sure to wear a face shield while using a cutting wheel on your rotary tool. Those wheels can explode if they get too hot. I had one happen to me, and luckily I had a face protection on and it saved me from losing an eye. Once I had it cut out, I hot glued it into place. Don't use super glue as it clouds up most plastics. I got these gas mask hoses on Amazon. I'll try and link them down in the description below if you want to pick some up. I had to cut off a portion of it to make it fit on the helmet. To give the hoses a support, I glued a 24mm EVA dowel onto the mask, burrowing in just a little bit to give the dowel extra surface area to grip to. Then I just hot glued the hoses on top of the EVA dowels. I know that the game model doesn't have a hose clamp on the hoses, but I thought it was a nice practical thing to put on it. Sometimes little touches of real bits can make the whole thing feel more legit. I also zip tied the hoses in the middle to the foam. The in-game model just bulges out, but I preferred it to be closer to the helmet. Seems like it would be more practical and less likely to get tangled up in those ginormous pauldrons that they wear. My hose clamps are spray painted with black and brown to make them look old, but they're brand new. I kept the paint job relatively simple in that I just dirtied it up with a couple of washes of watered black and brown acrylic paint. I could go and rust it and all those things, but I just didn't have time. Once they dried, I painted the tubes a light yellow and hit the rivets with a chrome paint pen. And with that, my T45D Power Armor helmet is complete. In the comments below, let me know what you think of this build. Maybe if this video gets a ton of views, I could be coerced into trying to tackle the whole full suit. It would need to be a lot. Let's say 100,000 views. What's your favorite Fallout armor or weapon? Is there something that I haven't made yet that you'd like to see built? Leave it down in the comments. And we are finished. Here is the end result. I really like how this thing turned out. It's a bit large, which it's supposed to be. This suit of armor, like I said in the intro, is meant to be on like a metal frame and the person actually walks into it, so it will be oversized. If you wanted to build this more to scale, I would say probably 90% would fit my head comfortably. There's a lot of empty space in there. It's very bobbleheadish when I put it on. But yeah, I'm definitely going to have to stare at this for a while. Maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to pull something from your video game of all time, bring it into the real world, and then just oogle it and ogle it for days on end and probably play the game with it on. Yeah. Maybe you'll get some...
Yay!
And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them, much props. I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. Or just shoot some really cool guns. Peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.